You Can Understand the Bible, Biblical Interpretation Seminar Textbook, Dr. Bob Utley. You Can Understand the Bible, Biblical Interpretation Seminar Textbook by Dr. Bob Utley, and we found this in the public domain, public access, so there shouldn't be any copyright claim or strike generated us. Dr. Bob Utley's You Can Understand the Bible, Biblical Interpretation Seminar includes chapters on biblical authority, the interpreter, contextual method of biblical interpretation, possible interpretive pitfalls, practical procedures for interpretation, selected list of recommended research tools, a guide to good Bible reading, definitions of Greek grammatical forms which impact exegesis, samples of note-taking, and numerous other helps to assist Bible interpretation. For more of Dr. Utley's works, search for Bob Utley on archive.org. Dr. Utley's complete works are also available at freebiblecommentary.org. And there's also video on Dr. Bob's Bible seminar. You Can Understand the Bible. Here is the content page, table of contents, continued, a word from the author, a brief summary of this interpretive method. Biblical interpretation is a national and spiritual process that attempts to understand an ancient inspired writer in such a way that the message from God may be understood and applied in our day. The spiritual process is crucial but difficult to define. It does involve a yieldedness and openness to God. There must be a hunger, 1, for Him, 2, to know Him, and 3, to serve Him. This process involves prayer, confession, and the willingness for lifestyle change. The Spirit is crucial in the interpretive process, but why sincere godly Christians understand the Bible differently is a mystery. Probably because of different translations, different versions, revisions, etc. The rational process is easier to describe. We must be consistent and fair to the text and not be influenced by our personal, cultural or denominational biases. This is a common trait with translators. We are all historically conditioned. None of us are objective, neutral interpreters. This commentary offers a careful, rational process containing 3 interpretive principles, structured to help us attempt to overcome our biases. First principle. The first principle is to note the historical setting in which a biblical book was written and the particular historical occasion for its authorship, or when it was edited. The original author had a purpose and a message to communicate. The text cannot mean something to us that it never meant to the original ancient inspired author. His intent and our historical, emotional, cultural, personal or denominational need is the key. Application is an integral part to interpretation, but proper interpretation must always precede application. It must be reiterated that every biblical text has one and only one meaning. This is important to those out there who have commented us and said, oh yeah, well, you're relying on dead languages, etc., etc. It's the Spirit of God, it's a living thing, all this sort of stuff. This is very important. So we basically hit on it now, before we understood or knew this information. Or this information that backed up what we're doing, what we've been doing. It must be reiterated that every biblical text has one and only one meaning. This meaning is what the original biblical author intended through the Spirit's leadership to communicate to his day. This one meaning may have possible applications to different cultures and situations. These applications must be linked to the central truth of the original author. For this reason, this study guide commentary is designed to provide a brief introduction to each book of the Bible. And that's part of the reason why we bring you the original, ancient, very old tongue Ashrit, or Aramaic, in the sacred global language or old tongue that God spoke to Adam and Eve in the garden, translated into the nearest English equivalent, along with the Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscripts that were hidden, therefore preserved for over 2,000 years by the Apostolic Church of the East, translated by native-born Aramaic-speaking translator, filmmaker, historical documentary maker. It's basically Mesopotamian history, by native-born Aramaic speaker Victor N. Alexander, who comes from Mesopotamia, Syria. And he's translated all into the nearest English equivalent without the bias, prejudice, etc. common with most translators. The first principle is to note the historical setting in which a biblical book was written and the particular historical occasion for its authorship, or when it was edited. The original author had a purpose and a message to communicate. The text cannot mean something to us that is never meant to the original ancient inspired author. His intent, not our historical, emotional, cultural, personal or denominational need, is the key. Application is an integral part now to interpretation, but proper interpretation must always precede application. It must be reiterated that every biblical text has one and only one meaning. This meaning is what the original biblical author intended through the Spirit's leadership, talking about the Holy Spirit, to communicate to his day. The one meaning may have many possible applications to different cultures and situations. These applications must be linked to the central truth of the original author. For this reason, this study guide commentary is designed to provide a brief introduction to each book of the Bible. Second principle. The second principle is to identify the literary units. Every biblical book is a unified document. Interpreters have no right to isolate one aspect of truth by excluding others. Therefore, we must strive to understand the purpose of the whole biblical book before we interpret the individual literary units. The individual parts, chapters, paragraphs, or verses cannot mean what the whole unit does not mean. Interpretation must move from a deductive approach of the whole to an inductive approach to the parts. Therefore, this study guide commentary is designed to help the student analyze the structure of each literary unit by paragraphs. Paragraphs and chapters divisions are not inspired, but they do aid us in identifying thought units. Interpreting at a paragraph level, not sentence, clause, phrase, or word level, is the key in following the biblical author's intended meaning. Paragraphs are based on a unified topic, often called the theme or topical sentence. Every word, phrase, clause, and sentence in the paragraph relates somehow to this unified theme. They limit it, expand it, explain it, and or question it. A real key to proper interpretation is to follow the original author's thought on a paragraph-by-paragraph basis through the individual literary units that make up the biblical book. This study guide commentary is designed to help the student do that by comparing the paragraphing of modern English translations with modern Americanized English translations. These translations have been selected because they employ different translation theories. The New King James Version, NKJV, is a word-for-word literal translation based on the Greek manuscript tradition known as the Textus Receptus. Its paragraph divisions are longer than the other translations. These longer units help the student to see the unified topics. B. The new revised standard version, NRSV, is a modified word-for-word translation. It forms a midpoint between the following two modern versions. Its paragraph divisions are quite helpful in identifying subjects. But just keep in mind, they do have errors, they do have contradictions, but not in the sense that the copyists are contradicting about what's being relayed in the scriptures. C. The today's English version TEV is the dynamic equivalent translation published by the United Bible Society. Be wary of these Bible societies, the American and those similar, such as this one. It attempts to translate the Bible in such a way that a modern English reader or speaker can understand the meaning of the original text. D. The Jerusalem Bible, JB, is a dynamic equivalent translation based on a French Catholic translation. Rabbi Toby Singh says, watch out for this one. It is very helpful in comparing the paragraphing from a European perspective. E. The printed text is the 1995 updated New American Standard Bible, NASB, which is a word-for-word translation. The verse-by-verse comments follow this paragraphing. And again, just be wary of these translations. They are originally stemming from monk scribes like Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformist translators like Wycliffe, Tinsdale, etc. And very often stem from the ancient or older old church fathers of the Roman Catholic Church. Third principle. The third principle is to read the Bible in different translations in order to grasp the widest possible range of meaning, semantic field, that biblical words or phrases may have. It's like you use one as a reference or cross-reference to establish the facts that they have to synchronize. Okay. You have to study, do personal research on possibly the writers, the copyists, etc., to see if they are infallible, irrefutable, and then once you've done that, it deems their writings as irrefutable, infallible. They can still be debunked, but they can't be denied because they're irrefutable or infallible. The evidence has proven itself evident, etc. The third principle is to read the Bible in different translations in order to grasp the widest possible range of meaning, semantic field, that biblical words or phrases may have. Often a phrase or word can be understood in several ways. Sometimes they have dual meanings, right? Or more. These different translations bring up these options and help us to identify and explain the manuscript variations. These do not affect doctrine, but they do help us to try to get back to the original text penned by an inspired ancient writer. Well, the original ancient, very old Tab Asherit and Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscripts have idioms. These are the expressions that the Eastern prophets, apostles, disciples, etc. used. Their forms of expression to get the message across. So the originals that we present you always have these idioms, these footnotes, and explain the idioms used below. It's kind of it's an Eastern mindset thing, right? It's the way they thought, it's the way they express themselves. Sometimes it's translated directly from what was written without having a fixed grammatical correct sentence, right, in English. Fourth principle. The fourth principle is to note the literary genre. Original inspired authors chose to record their messages in different forms, i.e., for example, historical narrative, historical drama, poetry, prophecy, gospel, parable, letter, apocalyptic. These different forms have special keys to interpretation. See Gordon Fee and Doug Stewart, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, D. Brent, Sandy and Ronald L. Geeser Jr., Cracking Old Testament Codes, or Robert Stein, Playing by the Rules. This textbook offers a quick way for the student to check his interpretations. It is not meant to be definitive, but rather informative and thought-provoking. Often, other possible interpretations help us not be so parochial, dogmatic and denominational. Interpreters need to have a larger range of interpretive options to recognize how ambiguous the ancient text can be. It is shocking how little agreement there is among Christians who claim the Bible as a source of truth. Yeah, because there's too many translations. It's like 30,000 of them, so the wording is different, often incorrect, and that's where people get confused, especially if it's in Shakespeare speak. Old English, and it says, "Wherefore art thou, O Lord, thy, thee, thou," etc. And that's probably why they decided to create a new King James Version so they can better understand it in today's English, instead of a Romeo and Juliet script or translation. This textbook offers a quick way for the student to check his interpretation. It is not meant to be definitive, but rather informative and thought-provoking. Often other possible interpretations help us not be so parochial, dogmatic and denominational. Interpreters need to have a larger range of interpretive options to recognize how ambiguous the ancient text can be. It is shocking how little agreement there is among Christians who claim the Bible as a source of truth, their source of truth. These principles have helped the author to overcome much of his historical conditioning by forcing him to struggle with the ancient text. His hope was that it will be a blessing to you as well. Bob Utley, East Texas Baptist University, June 27, 1966. Introduction. 1. A word about the trend in biblical interpretation towards specializations in hermeneutics. The author states here that he could remember as a new believer how excited he was about understanding more about Christ, the Christian life in the Bible. He was told that it was the joy and job of every believer to study the Bible, and he could remember how frustrating it was when he began reading the Bible. What he thought would be an exciting adventure turned into a confusing nightmare. Exactly. The thought of personal Bible study frightens most Christians. It seems to be so difficult without any formal training. Yet Psalm 119 persistently beckons every Christian to feed on the spiritual nourishment of Scripture. Mayhew, 1986, page 45. But there was hope. The author was told that religious training would provide the tools and techniques necessary to understand the Bible for himself, but this turned out to be a half-truth. It was true that religious training opened the Bible to him in many wonderful ways. However, very quickly it was evident to him that more education and specialization were needed to really understand the Bible. Suddenly he realized that years of linguistic, semantic, exegetical, hermeneutical and theological expertise were needed to fully understand the Bible. That's why I say really only the historians, biblical historians or Bible historians, know what they're talking about. They fully understand it. By this time, the author's level of education was such that he recognized that the specialists who were training him did not interpret the Bible with uniformity either. Silver, 1987, pages 2 to 3. They each claimed their educational acumen in their particular field was crucial to proper biblical interpretation, and yet they continued to disagree on how to interpret certain difficult passages. Well, it shouldn't be difficult, right? And that's what we found with the original ancient Tav Esheret and the original ancient Galilean Aramaic New Testament translated into English, nearest English equivalent, by Victor and Alexander. Cleared up a hell of a lot of the confusions that we had about Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, where did Cain get his wife from, who were the other people that he was afraid of in the land of Nod. He didn't want to go there, they'd kill him, he reckoned, and so forth. It really cleared it up, this original ancient Aramaic translated into the nearest English equivalent by 15 Alexander.